The chapel of Ravenshade stood solemn against the grey morning sky, its stone walls bearing witness to centuries of veil marriages. Today would add one more to its ledger, a union of necessity, not affection. Lady Evangeline Moorcroft trembled at the threshold, her paleness rivaling the ivory of her gown. The assembled aristocracy watched with barely concealed interest, fans fluttering like restless birds. "A marriage of convenience," someone whispered. "The Duke requires only her dowry and womb." Evangeline's heart constricted at the words, though she had known their truth since accepting his proposal. Her gloved fingers clutched a prayer book, knuckles white against the leather binding. At the altar stood the Duke of Ravenshade, Dorian Vale, his posture rigid as the family crest above the chapel door. Not once had he looked back to glimpse his bride. The organ's solemn notes filled the air as she moved forward, each step measured by duty rather than desire. Her veil, delicate as morning frost, concealed the tear that slipped unbidden down her cheek. Lady Verena Lismore, the Duke's cousin, observed from the front pew with calculating eyes. "The bloodline shall be preserved," she had declared when the engagement was announced. "The Vale name requires heirs, not sentiment." Evangeline reached the altar steps, her heartbeat a frantic counterpoint to the organ's somber cadence. Dorian's eyes, when they finally met hers, were cold as January frost. The ceremony proceeded like a well-rehearsed play, with vows exchanged in voices that betrayed no emotion. "I, Dorian, take thee, Evangeline." His words fell between them, stark and hollow. When the moment came to place the ring upon her finger, his touch was perfunctory, impersonal. The heavy gold band bore the Vale signet, a raven in flight. Evangeline stared at it, this shackle of obligation, while the priest continued his litany. The congregation watched, their scrutiny a tangible weight. None expected love, they required only legitimate succession. If any person present knows cause or just impediment, the priest's voice echoed through the chapel. Silence answered him, broken only by the rustle of silk and the occasional cough. Evangeline swayed slightly, light-headed from the incense and the crushing weight of her circumstance. Dorian remained unmoved beside her, his attention fixed upon the crucifix rather than his bride. "Until death do you part." The priest's words seemed to come from a great distance now. The chapel's stone floor tilted beneath Evangeline's feet, her vision dimmed at the edges, darkness encroaching like spilled ink. She tried to speak, to reach for support, but her limbs had grown leaden. The prayer book slipped from her fingers, its thud against the floor oddly muffled to her failing senses. "Your Grace, your bride." The alarmed voice of the priest cut through the fog of her consciousness. Evangeline felt herself falling, her knees buckling beneath her weight. The last thing she saw was Dorian's face, his composure finally shattered as she collapsed before the altar. A collective gasp swept through the assembly as her body met the cold stone. The veil billowed and settled over her like a shroud. "The lady is with child," came the shocked whisper, rippling through the congregation like wildfire. "The Duke's heir lies within her." For the first time in his life, Dorian Vale moved without calculation. He knelt beside his fallen bride, unmindful of the dust that marred his immaculate attire. His hand, when it touched her cheek, trembled. "Fetch the physician," he commanded, his voice stripped of its usual detachment. "Now!" As attendants rushed to obey, the chapel fell silent. The Duke gathered Evangeline's limp form into his arms, her head cradled against his chest. A drop of blood stained her white glove, bright as the rubies in the Vale tiara. Something broke within Dorian's chest, a wall he had not known existed until it crumbled. "My lord," Lady Verena approached, her voice low with disapproval. "Let the servants attend her. This display is beneath your station." Dorian looked up, his eyes no longer those of the cold aristocrat who had stood at the altar moments before. "Silence," he commanded. "Before these witnesses, I shall not see her shamed." Lady Verena stepped back, stunned by the fervor in his tone. The Duke rose. Evangeline gathered in his arms and turned to face the assembled guests. The veil fell away, revealing her ashen face to all. "The ceremony shall wait," he declared. "My wife and my heir require care that supersedes all else." The ton watched in stunned silence as the Duke of Ravenshade, who had married for blood and bloodline alone, carried his unconscious bride from the chapel, her veil trailing behind them like a banner of surrender. Candlelight danced across the bedchamber walls, casting shadows that seemed to breathe with each flicker of the flame. 3 days had passed since Evangeline's collapse, 3 days in which Dorian had scarcely left her side. She lay pale against the damask pillows, her golden hair unbound and flowing like water across the linens. The physician had come and gone, his prognosis guarded. "Both the lady and child remain in peril, Your Grace," he had said. "Only time will reveal their fate." Dorian sat beside her, a man transformed by vigil. His cravat hung loosely about his neck, his waistcoat unbuttoned in disregard for propriety. He watched the shallow rise and fall of her chest, counting each breath as though it were a precious jewel. The heir, his heir, depended on her survival, but in the quiet hours of this unexpected communion, Dorian had discovered a truth more profound than duty. He feared for her, not merely for the child she carried. The door opened softly, admitting Lady Verena. Her eyes narrowed at the scene before her. "Cousin," she began, her voice tight with disapproval, "the Tun speaks of nothing else. You must address the situation. The marriage remains incomplete." "The marriage is before God," Dorian replied without looking away from Evangeline's face. "I care not for gossip." "You care not for the veil name, it seems." Verena's words cut like glass. "A name 8 centuries in the making, now teetering on scandal because you play nursemaid." Dorian's hand tightened around Evangeline's limp fingers. "The veil name shall continue through the child she carries." "If she carries your child at all," Verena whispered, the words a poisonous dart. "Who can say what secret she kept until the altar revealed it?" The accusation hung in the air like a miasma. Dorian rose slowly, turning to face his cousin, with eyes that had regained their coldness, though now it was directed at her rather than his bride. "Speak plainly, madam, if you dare impugn her honor." Verena lifted her chin. "I speak only of possibilities. Her family's circumstances were desperate. A duchess's coronet would tempt many to deception. Leave us." His voice brooked no argument. When Verena hesitated, Dorian stepped toward her, every inch the duke whose word was law on his lands. "Now." The door closed behind her with a decisive click. Dorian returned to Evangeline's bedside, his mind awhirl with unwelcome doubts. Could she have deceived him? Yet even as the thought formed, he recalled her demeanor throughout their brief acquaintance, her quiet dignity, her lack of artifice. No, the child was his, conceived perhaps on their one night together following the engagement, a dutiful consummation devoid of tenderness. How cold he had been, how calculating. Evangeline had come to him without complaint, offering herself as part of the marital contract. He had taken what was his by right, then dismissed her until the wedding day. Not once had he asked of her hopes, her fears, her desires. She had been merely a vessel for his ambition, to continue the veil line, to secure the dukedom's future. "Dorian," her voice weak as a winter sparrow's, broke his reverie. He leaned forward, disbelieving. "Evangeline." Her eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding their azure depths. "The wedding, what happened?" "You fell at the altar," he said gently, taking her hand between both of his. "You have been unwell these 3 days past." Comprehension dawned in her expression, followed swiftly by shame. "The child," she whispered. "You know." "I know." His thumb traced circles on her palm, a gesture of intimacy entirely new between them. "Why did you not tell me?" She turned her face away. "I feared you would think I trapped you, that I sought the marriage only for position." "Did you not?" The question escaped before he could reconsider its cruelty. Evangeline met his gaze then, her eyes clear despite her weakness. "I accepted your proposal because my father bid me do so. I kept the child secret because I loved you, though you showed me nothing but contempt." The simple declaration struck him like a physical blow. Love, a word never spoken between them, a concept he had dismissed as irrelevant to their arrangement. "I have wronged you grievously," he admitted, the words unfamiliar on his tongue. "You have done only what was expected of a duke," she replied softly. "Our marriage was never to be more than a contract." "Expectations may change," Dorian said, surprising himself with the fervor in his voice. "I have sat here these 3 days, watching you hover between life and death. I have learned more in that vigil than in all my years as duke." A tentative hope flickered in her eyes. "What have you learned, Your Grace?" "That blood without love creates only cold legacy." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm with reverence entirely new to him. "That I married for continuation, but found something far more precious in my fear of losing you." Tears gathered in Evangeline's eyes. "You speak from guilt, my lord. When I am recovered, your sense of duty will reassert itself." "No," he said firmly. "Before these witnesses," he gestured to the empty room, indicating a vow more sacred than those they had begun in the chapel. "I swear that duty led me to the altar, but love shall guide me henceforth." As if to underscore his declaration, the babe within her stirred, a flutter that brought color to Evangeline's pale cheeks. Dorian placed his hand upon the gentle swell of her abdomen, wonder replacing the distant interest with which he had previously regarded his unborn heir. "Rest now," he murmured, adjusting the coverlet around her shoulders. "The physician will return at dusk. You must recover your strength, for yourself, for our child, and for me." Evangeline's lips curved in a tentative smile, the first genuine emotion she had displayed in his presence. "I shall try, my lord." "Dorian," he corrected gently. "Between us, let there be no titles, only truth." A knock at the door interrupted their fragile communion. Expecting the physician, Dorian called for entry, only to find his steward bearing a silver tray. Upon it lay a single letter, sealed with red wax and the crest of Evangeline's father. "It arrived by special messenger, your grace," the steward explained, offering the tray with a bow. Dorian took the letter, puzzled by its timing. Breaking the seal, he unfolded the parchment and began to read. With each line, his expression darkened, the newfound warmth in his eyes receding like tide from shore. Evangeline watched the transformation with growing dread. "What news, my Dorian?" When he looked up, his face had become a mask once more. The Duke of Ravenshade returned in full force. "Your father writes to clarify certain matters regarding your dowry," he said, his voice brittle as winter ice, "and to congratulate us on our blessed event. News, he claims, reached him a fortnight before our wedding day." The color drained from Evangeline's face. "That cannot be. I told no one." "Yet your father speaks with remarkable certainty." Dorian's fingers tightened around the letter until the parchment crackled in protest. "He expresses relief that our union was sealed before my discovery of your condition." "Dorian, I swear to you." "Did you lie when you said you loved me?" he interrupted, the question sharp as a blade. "Or do you lie now, claiming ignorance of your father's machinations?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, unchecked. "I have spoken only truth to you." "My father must have suspected. He would have—" She broke off, understanding flooding her features. "He would have used any means to secure the match." Dorian paced the length of the chamber, the letter clutched in his fist. "The Tun will say I was deceived, that the mighty Duke of Ravenshade was trapped into marriage by a family desperate for advantage." "And what will you say?" Evangeline asked, her voice small but steady. "Will you repudiate me and our child with me?" He stopped, struck by the courage in her question. Here she lay, weakened by her ordeal, carrying his heir, facing the prospect of disgrace, yet she met his gaze without flinching. "No," he said at last. "Whatever deception occurred, I believe it was not of your making." Relief softened her features. "Thank you for that much faith, at least. But there will be consequences." Dorian moved to the window, looking out over the Ravenshade estate, lands that had belonged to his family since William the Conqueror. "Your father's letter has ensured that." Before Evangeline could respond, the door burst open, admitting Lady Verena. Her face was alive with vindication as she brandished a newspaper. "The news is published," she announced triumphantly. "The Morning Post reports that the Duke of Ravenshade was ensnared by a family of fortune hunters. All of London speaks of nothing else." Dorian's jaw tightened. "You brought this to the press." "I acted to protect the Vale name," Verena countered. "The lady's condition was obvious to all at the chapel. Better the family control the narrative than allow speculation to run unchecked." "And what narrative have you crafted, cousin?" He took the paper from her hands, scanning the article with mounting fury. "Only that you were misled, that the child's paternity remains unproven." Verena glanced toward the bed with undisguised contempt. "The courts may yet annul this travesty." Evangeline made a small sound of distress, her hands moving protectively over her abdomen. Dorian looked from her to his cousin, then to the letter still crushed in his grip. In that moment of decision, he felt the weight of centuries, the expectations of every Vale Duke who had preceded him, the burden of blood and name and legacy. Yet stronger still was the memory of those 3 days beside Evangeline's bed, the fear he had felt at the prospect of her loss. Was that not also legacy? Not blood preserved in cold succession, but warmth kindled where once was only duty. "Lady Verena," he said, his voice measured and formal, "you have overstepped beyond all forgiveness." Verena stiffened. "I have acted only in the family's interest." "No," Dorian interrupted, crossing to stand beside Evangeline's bed. "You have acted according to your own bitterness. The child my wife carries is mine, and I shall proclaim it so before all of London." "You cannot know that," Verena hissed. "I know my wife," he replied, the simple statement carrying the weight of newfound conviction. And tomorrow all of society shall know my mind on this matter. Evangeline looked up at him, hope warring with uncertainty in her eyes. Dorian? He took her hand, raising it to his lips with deliberate ceremony. The Vale name has endured for centuries through blood alone. Perhaps it is time it learned the strength of love as well. Verena watched the gesture with mounting horror. You would choose her over your own blood? A woman you scarcely know, who may carry another man's child? I choose what I should have valued from the beginning. Dorian's voice rang with quiet authority. Leave Ravenshade tonight, cousin. You are no longer welcome in this house. The chapel of Ravenshade glowed with the light of 100 candles, their flames steady in the still air. The pews were filled once more, the ton assembled in greater numbers than before, drawn by scandal and curiosity. Evangeline stood at the threshold, her complexion still pale but her bearing resolute. Her gown was simpler than at the first ceremony, but the quiet dignity with which she wore it drew every eye. At the altar waited Dorian, Duke of Ravenshade, dressed in formal attire, yet somehow transformed from the cold aristocrat who had stood there weeks before. His eyes, when they found hers across the length of the chapel, held warmth that sent colour to her cheeks. Lady Verena was notably absent, having departed for the continent the night after her banishment, taking her poison with her. The Morning Post lay displayed in every drawing-room in London, its headline declaring in bold type, Duke of Ravenshade to renew vows, claims heir as rightful blood. Beneath it, a statement issued from Ravenshade House proclaimed the Duke's absolute faith in his Duchess and their coming child, denouncing all rumours to the contrary as malicious falsehoods. Evangeline began her processional, each step firm despite her recent weakness. The congregation murmured, fans fluttering like agitated birds, but she kept her gaze fixed on Dorian. The veil she wore was new, her original having been stained during her collapse, but in her hands she carried a single token from that day, a prayer book, still marked at the page where their vows had been interrupted. As she reached the altar steps, Dorian descended to meet her, breaking with protocol to offer his arm in support. Are you certain? He asked softly, for her ears alone. The ton will talk regardless of what occurs here today. Let them, she replied, her voice clear and unafraid. I stand beside you by choice, not duty. Together they ascended to the altar, facing the priest who had begun their journey weeks before. This time the ceremony proceeded without interruption, though the vows they exchanged bore little resemblance to the mechanical recitations of their first attempt. I, Dorian, take thee, Evangeline, the Duke proclaimed, his voice carrying to every corner of the chapel, not for blood or name or legacy, but for the love I discovered in the shadow of loss. What began in duty shall continue in devotion. Tears glistened in Evangeline's eyes as she responded, I, Evangeline, take thee, Dorian, not as Duke but as man. The child we share shall know both blood and love as birthright. When Dorian placed the ring upon her finger, the same heavy gold band bearing the Vale signet, he no longer saw it as a shackle, but as a bond freely chosen. With this ring, I thee wed, he said, and pledge to you, not merely my name, but my heart entire. The priest pronounced them husband and wife, though in truth they had held that title since their interrupted ceremony. This time, however, when Dorian lifted Evangeline's veil, he did so with reverence born of genuine affection. His kiss, witnessed by the assembled aristocracy, was tender rather than perfunctory. A murmur swept through the congregation, not of scandal, but of something approaching approval. The ton, ever susceptible to romance despite their cynical facades, found themselves moved by the transformation before them. As they turned to face the assembly, Dorian's hand rested protectively over Evangeline's, where it lay upon the gentle swell of their child. Before these witnesses, he declared, his voice resonant with conviction, I proclaim this woman my Duchess, her honour beyond question, our child, the true heir of Ravenshade. The assembly rose in acknowledgement, propriety demanding their respect if not their belief. Yet among them were many who found themselves swayed by the evident devotion between Duke and Duchess, a far cry from the cold arrangement they had witnessed before. Dorian led Evangeline down the aisle, past the whispers and the stairs, into the sunlight that streamed through the chapel doors. Unlike the grey morning of their first ceremony, today the sky was clear and bright, as if nature itself approved the renewal of their vows. They will still talk, Evangeline said softly as they paused at the threshold. Let them speak, Dorian replied, covering her hand with his own, where it rested upon his arm. We shall answer with the truth of our lives together. As they stepped into the light, the chapel bells began to ring, joyful where once they had tolled with somber duty. The Duke of Ravenshade, who had married for blood alone, found himself transformed by love, unexpected. The veil of pride had fallen away, revealing a truth more valuable than any lineage, the heart's capacity for change, even in the shadow of generations of cold tradition. Behind them, the prayer book remained upon the altar, open to the page where their journey had faltered and begun anew, a testament to the power of second chances and to the discovery that the truest legacy is not preserved in blood, but nurtured in love. Snow fell softly over Ravenshade as spring yielded to another winter. The estate, once austere in its grandeur, had taken on a warmth that even the December frost could not diminish. In the nursery, a fire crackled merrily in the grate, casting golden light upon the Duchess as she sat beside the cradle, her voice gentle as she sang an ancient lullaby. Within the cradle lay the young heir of Ravenshade, 3 months old, and already displaying the veiled features, dark hair and eyes the precise shade of his father's. Dorian paused in the doorway, unwilling to interrupt the scene before him. How different this moment from what he had imagined when he first proposed their match. Then he had envisioned a dutiful heir, produced from a marriage of convenience, raised according to tradition with the appropriate distance between aristocratic parent and child. Now, he found himself drawn to the nursery at all hours, captivated by his son's smallest gestures, his heart expanding with each day in ways he had never thought possible. "Will you stand there all evening, or join us?" Evangeline asked without turning, a smile in her voice. He entered, moving to stand behind her chair, his hand coming to rest upon her shoulder. "I was admiring the tableau, the Madonna of Ravenshade and her child." She reached up to cover his hand with her own, their fingers intertwining with the easy intimacy they had discovered together. "He has your scowl when displeased, and your determination," Dorian replied, bending to press a kiss to the top of her head. "The nurse says he refuses to sleep until you have sung to him, a trait he shares with his father." Her eyes sparkled with mischief as she glanced up at him. "Though your requirements for contentment are somewhat different." A blush warmed his cheeks, still unaccustomed to such teasing despite the months of their true marriage. "The difference being that I am capable of patience, whereas our son demands immediate satisfaction." Another trait inherited from his father. She laughed softly. The infant stirred, tiny fists waving in the air before settling once more into sleep. Dorian watched, marveling at the perfect miniature features, the absolute trust with which his son surrendered to slumber. This was blood and legacy made manifest, yet so much more than he had ever understood those concepts to mean. "A letter arrived from Lady Verena," he said after a comfortable silence. "From Venice." Evangeline's expression sobered. "What does she write?" "That she has met an Italian count who shares her appreciation for lineage and propriety." Dorian's tone was wry. "She hopes we will receive them when they tour England in the spring." "Will we?" He considered the question, remembering Verena's cruelty, her attempt to destroy what had become the center of his world. Yet he also recalled his own coldness, his disregard for anything beyond duty, before Evangeline's collapse had shattered his certainties. "Perhaps," he said at last, "she is still blood after all." "Blood you once valued above all else," Evangeline observed without rancor. "Blood I mistook for the whole of inheritance." Dorian knelt beside her chair, looking from her face to their sleeping son. "I understand now what my father never taught me, that the Vale name continues not merely through succession, but through the love that gives it meaning." Evangeline touched his cheek, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with tenderness. "You speak like a poet rather than a duke." "I speak like a man who nearly lost everything of value while pursuing a shadow." He turned his face to press a kiss to her palm. "The tongue still whispers, you know. They call us the Duke and Duchess of Sentiment." "A title I bear with pride," she replied, her smile gentle. "Better that than what they first called me, the vessel of convenience." Dorian winced at the reminder of how their union had begun. "Forgive me for that beginning." "There is nothing to forgive." She rose, drawing him with her to stand beside the cradle. "Look what beauty grew from that cold soil." Together they gazed down at their son, the perfect synthesis of their bloodlines, yet so much more than the sum of ancient crests and family trees. In his peaceful slumber lay the promise of a legacy renewed, one built on foundations stronger than mere duty or tradition. From the hallway came the sound of servants preparing for the Christmastide celebrations, the first to be truly observed at Ravenshade in generations. The house, like its master, had awakened from a long winter of the soul into unexpected spring. "When they speak of us in years to come," Dorian said softly, "let them say that the Duke of Ravenshade married for blood, but learned to live for love." Evangeline leaned against him, her head finding its familiar place against his shoulder. "And let them say that his Duchess, who fell at the altar carrying his unborn heir, rose again to teach him the true meaning of legacy." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the ancient stones of Ravenshade in a mantle of pristine white, nature's own renewal of what had once seemed immutable. Within the walls that had witnessed centuries of veil succession, a new chapter had begun, written not in the cold ink of obligation, but in the warm blood of genuine affection. The veil from their wedding day, once stained with the evidence of Evangeline's collapse, had been preserved in a glass case in the Duke's private study, a reminder of the moment when blood and love had collided, and love had proven the stronger force. Thus did the Duke of Ravenshade, who had married for blood and bloodline alone, discover that the heart's inheritance transcends all crests and coronets. In the quiet moments beside his wife and child, he found a truth greater than any his ancestors had recorded in their ancient ledgers, that love, once admitted, becomes the noblest legacy of all. The story of the Duke and Duchess would be told for generations at Ravenshade, a testament to the power of transformation, even in the most tradition-bound hearts. For what began as a marriage of cold calculation had blossomed into something the tongue could scarcely comprehend, a union where duty and desire walked hand in hand, and where the continuation of blood became not an end in itself, but the beautiful consequence of genuine devotion. If this tale has moved your heart, let your voice be heard. For just as the Duke learned the value of expressing what truly matters, so too may your words honor the sentiment that transforms duty to devotion. The season may change, but stories of redemption through love shall endure.